Good evening and welcome to episode 12 of the Third and Short podcast with our very, very special guest, the one and only Jeff Reinebold. You will have seen him on Sky Sports, 100% you will have seen Jeff. He's an absolute pillar of the NFL Sky Sports community, and we are amazed to have such an amazing person on our podcast. It's a pleasure from my point of view, and I'm sure the other guys feel the same. We're just going to almost hand over straight to you, Jeff, if that's okay. And what we always ask people is, how did you get into NFL particularly, or American football, and where your journey's taken you? Because obviously you've got quite an extensive CV, I would say.
Hey, you see all this gray, man? You see all this gray? Hey, you don't have that much time. that's a lot of miles, bro.
So obviously, from the cap, you're a Raiders fan. So why Raiders?
You know what? It's my NFL thing was kind of crazy because my dad was a three-sport college athlete in Mississippi, and really loved baseball, and that was his deal. And he ended up in pro baseball for about 30 years, and so sports was always really big in our house. And I have 3 brothers and a sister, and they were all athletes. And so, kind of, how competitive it gets when you got so many kids like we had 5 kids and had a 3-bedroom house. So you do the math, man. that doesn't work real good. But it was it was a great way to grow up because we're outside playing all the time and all that. And everything. I think the biggest thing was the game is so unique. And I grew up we were all over the place when I was small. And then when the kids all got to about junior high age, so you're about 12, my mother said to my dad, hey, you can go do your baseball thing, but I'm keeping these kids in one spot. And she chose the town where her parents lived, and that was South Bend, Indiana. And just kind of crazily, they bought a little tiny home, about maybe 1.5 miles off the campus at Notre Dame. And so when you grow up in South Bend and you grow up around Notre Dame, and like, for example, I remember as a kid playing football in the yard with the other kids in the neighborhood, and we would stop playing when Notre Dame scored a touchdown because you could hear the band in the crowd. So we would all stop for a second and pretend like they were cheering for us. And so, and then I suppose if I was like a dime store psychologist, I would say that I probably chose football because it was my thing. Like if anything I did in baseball, I was always Jim's kid, right? But if I did something in football, I was, it was something I did by myself. And so I think probably that had something to do with it. And then, like now they got all these titles, like they got, ADD and, all that other stuff. And I probably had all of that plus, right? Because I was one of those kids that I never stopped. Like, like my mother I used to drive my mother crazy because I wouldn't come in. Right, I'd be out playing all day long. Anyway, so, I'm just this little hyperactive kid, and football was like, because it moved, compared to baseball, which was slow, and and it was physical. It was, you could tackle and you could hit and so I just realized, like really, really early on that was really the game that I wanted to be a part of. And then I played high school football. I played college football. I got hurt in college. And, I was so, like I said, I was so maladjusted. Like if it hadn't been for football, I would have never gone to school, I'm sure. And my senior year, we were about halfway through the season, and I'm walking past the head coach's office, and he goes, Jeffrey, and like nobody called me Jeffrey except my mother when she was pissed at me, and Jack. And so I thought, oh, like I'm going through that Rolodex in my mind where you're taking that 20-meter walk into his office to think, oh my, what did I do? What am I going to have to, how am I going to have to weasel my way out of this one, right? And he sat me down and he said, what are you going to do when this is over? And I was like, what? And he goes, what are you going to do when there's no more football? And I said, what are you talking about, Jack? Like, I was like it was just like dumbfounded. I had torn my bicep that year and played through a torn bicep. And he said, this is going to end for you in 6 games. And you need to have a future. There's something you've got to find. And he's the one that got me into coaching, because he said, I think you should coach. And, it was the best career guidance I ever got. So I went home that night where I was living and called my dad. And I said, Dad, I think I know what I'm going to do with my life. And I was like silence on the phone, because he's like this whacked kid of mine. And I said, I think I want to coach. And he said, well, son, it's not that easy. You don't just, it's not like working at Sears. You don't just go get a job. So he goes through this long story on the phone, like, there's no money in it. It's hard on your family. You'll have to move all the time. There's no security, But what he was doing was being a good dad. He was trying to, he really recognized after, he was probably in his career at that time about 20 years. And he recognized that, it's not a job that you can do halfway, right? You're either in or you're not. And if you're going to be any good at it. And so he was trying to make sure that I knew what I was getting into. Yeah. And, so, I mean, I could tell you the long story version, but basically my head coach was going to leave where I went to school and go to Boston College. And he said, Jeff, I'll take you with me as a GA, graduate assistant, but I don't think that's good for you. You need to get out, get on your own, create your own contact network. He said, this is a contact-oriented business. You need to know people, because, that's how this thing works. I mean, I got such great advice. And so he throws this book across the table at me, and it's a little, probably a 300-page book, and it had every school in America that played college football. And he said, write them letters and tell them you want to become a graduate assistant, which is the entry-level position in coaching. So I wrote like 75 letters to Division I schools and got 74 no's. And New Mexico State sent me a letter. After a while, I gotten so used to the no's, like I could feel the envelope and know that it was a no, because there was a 1-page, thank you for your application, we'll keep it on file. Basically, beat it, kid, right? So I picked this one up from New Mexico State, and I can see that it's handwritten, because you can kind of see through the envelope, and I see it's handwritten. So I'm like, wow. So I rip it open, and the guy there's that form letter again that says, thank you for your interest in New Mexico State football. However, we have no positions on our staff at this time. I can still, to this day, I read it so many times. But the head guy wrote, his name was Gil Krieger, and he wrote on it, he said, Jeff, I don't have anything, but one of my coaches just took a job at Western Montana, right? Well, if you know anything about the geography of the United States, Montana is this huge-ass state, and there's like 600,000 people. It's like the 4th biggest state in America, and there's like 600,000 people. There is nothing out there, like jackrabbits and mule deer, and that's it. And I wasn't going to the University of Montana or Montana State, or I was going to Western Montana, which was in Dillon, Montana, and I couldn't even find the town on the map when I started looking for it, right? But I get a hold of Coach Chris, and he says, we kind of do a phone interview kind of thing. That was in the days of virtual interviews, but it wasn't because of pandemic is because they didn't have any money to fly you out there to interview, right? So we talk on the phone, and he calls me back. You know, I thought it went well, and he called me back about 3 days later, and he said, I've thought about it, and I'm going to give the job to a kid that had played quarterback there, and he wanted to give back to his ex-player, which again, I understand. That was great, right? So now I'm done. I can't I'm not going to get into coaching, so I don't know what to do. So I end up starting the process of joining the Peace Corps to go bring wells to Africa, water to Africa. I mean, seriously, I was ready to go.
Yeah.
And I was probably, you got to go through a series of shots and all kinds of shit when you go there, right? And so I'm going through that process, and it's like July now, and I'm supposed to report to the Peace Corps in August, and he calls me back, and that coach that he was going to hire had a young wife, and she had just gotten pregnant, and the coach had a chance to go get a high school coaching job and teaching job, which probably paid him at that time probably $15,000, or he could take the graduate assistant job at Western Montana, which paid him $2,000 for the whole year, right? So my first job, I made $2,000 for the entire year.
Wow.
Right? So anyway, but that's how I got started in coaching. And then just all along the way, it has been one stroke of good luck after another. Like the right people, I got introduced to the right people said the right things. And I've been like, that was 1983. And this is 2020. So that's a lot of years ago. And it's been like this incredible, the Grateful Dead. I don't know if you guys know who the Dead are, but the Grateful Dead is kind of a hippie rock band from the 70s and 80s. And there's a line in the song and it goes, "Oh, what a long, strange trip it's been." And that's basically, that's my coaching life, right? So I've been really, really fortunate, really blessed, really, really, really lucky. And so many people have had such a big impact on the direction my life has gone. And, the sad thing is you really, when you're young, you never think to say thank you. You know what I mean?
Well,
So
with how long your journey has been, what got you over to the UK into Sky Sports?
Bro, it's like, like I say, this is like, if anybody asks me, like sometimes you get young guys come to you and they go, "Dude, how do I get to do what you do?" Right? Or how do I get to have this? Or how do I get to be at this place or whatever? I said, man, if you come into me for advice like that, you're going to the wrong guy. Because and Mouth Say Tongue had a 5-year plan. I didn't think 5 minutes in front of what I was doing, right? I was always I never once, and this is really stupid, but it's the truth, so I'll be truthful with you. Rob Ryan calls me in like 2006, I think it was. And Lane Kiffin had just got the head coaching job with the Raiders. And Rob calls me and he goes, "Hey, are you interested in interviewing for a job here?" Well, frick, I'm a Raider guy. Like it's like going on a pilgrimage to go to that facility, right? So he says, "Now I'm just going to tell you, you're not going to get the job, but I think it would be good for you to come in and interview for it and go through the process and let people, because that's how it works, right?"
Getting your name out there, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So I go in, and Lane had just gotten a job, and I sit down and we go through this interview process. And it's like I say, I mean, that kind of stuff just kind of happened. we got fired. We had a team in Las Vegas in 2004. We got fired, or actually, we didn't get fired. The team went bankrupt at the end of the season. So I got no job. I'm living in Vegas, riding a motorcycle because they took our cars back. They usually give you a car when you get it. They took our cars back. So now the only good thing about that was in Vegas, it's at least warm, right? So I'm riding a motorcycle. I got like everything I owned you could put in one bag. And fellas, you're going to say bullshit on this, but it's true. There was almost 20 years where I lived and everything I owned you could put in 2 duffel bags. Everything, right? So I'm in Vegas and I go I go and apply for unemployment and insurance, and I can't get it. I'm turned down because I had only worked in the United States. I hadn't worked in the United States long enough to qualify because I've been up in Canada. And so I'm thinking, shit, I got to find a job. I got to do something. So I started doing extra work on movie and TV sets, right? And which is, I mean, like I said, if we, someday I'm going to write a book and people are going to say, no, man, but that's what I was doing, right? Like we did this one and we're the extras, right? We're the background guys. So we're doing a scene about this boxer and they take us to this dingy ass boxing gym in Vegas. And they like, my thing was I had to hit the speed bag and then they told us, okay, turn around, action, right? And I don't know who's the star of this thing because when they do the layout, when they do the, where they show the set and they do, I mean, it's like the kind of walkthrough. Yeah. The star never does that. He's always got a body double do that, right? So I just know it's going to be some black guy is the lead on this thing, right? So I'm hitting the speed bag, and all of a sudden, and I'm turned away from him. He comes down the stairs and he comes into the gym and he takes his robe off, which is what they told us was going to happen, right? And all of a sudden, this sound was like nothing I had ever heard. It was like, holy shit. And I turned around, which fucked up the whole show. I mean, the scene, right? So the director got pissed at me, but I'd never heard anybody hit a bag that hard. And I turned around and it was Roy Jones Jr. And this is when he was at the peak of his time, right? So shit like that just kind of kept happening, right? And I'm not like, I swear to God, my parents really thought that I was a lost soul. And so I get a call from my old college coach. And he said, Jeff, what are you doing? And I said, I'm hanging around Vegas. I'm doing this stuff on, extra work on television and movies. And, he said, well, don't you think you ought to get going trying to find a job? And I said, well, yeah, but, he goes, all right, give me he said, give me your requirements, right? So I go, requirements? I go, I don't have any requirements. Like, I didn't think, I was so out of touch, man. I didn't even think that way. Anyway, so I get a call from this guy, Galen Hall, who had been the head coach at Florida. A really, really good coach. One of the best coaches I've been around. And NFL Europe was coming back in 95. And he was going to be one of the head coaches. And initially, he was going to be the head coach in Scotland. But Galen had 2 dogs. And because Scotland's rules about importing animals were so tough, he took a job in Germany so he could get his dogs with him because they were going to make him quarantine his dogs. And see, this is why I love this so much, because people think that the business is like so well ironed out and organized. And if you guys had any idea the crazy stuff that goes on behind. Anyway, so Galen takes the job at the Rhine Fire, and I go to the Rhine Fire with him, and then we come back here and play. And Tony Allen was the national coach for the London Monarchs at that time, right? And so, and Tony, I don't know if you guys know Tony at all, but Tony's one of the best people I've ever met. Really a really good person. I still consider him a really close friend. But he's a little bit like a character on Layer Cake, right? He's one of those London guys that's, you know, he never smiles. He wears black everywhere he goes, you know, like, and so I'm the complete other guy to Tony, right? So we're doing a coaching thing and I'm busting his balls and about, you know, if you smile, your face would crack or something. I can't remember what I said. And he thought I was out of my mind. But that friendship or that relationship turned into a friendship. And then they started the international player program in like 99, I think it was. And Tony needed somebody to help him. And because I was comfortable on the ground in Europe, I knew my way around and I could, you know, speak enough to get out of trouble or into trouble in about 3 different countries. They hired me to do that. And so then I worked with Tony. Then Tony brought me to London and we worked out of the London office. And one day, at that time, Fox did all the NFL broadcasts over here, right? And they would use young guys. Aikman started over here. Moose Johnson started over here. Baldinger started over here, all of them. Well, Darren Woodson was supposed to do a game and something happened and he couldn't come. And it was like on a Friday. And he couldn't get the papers done fast enough to get another guy in. So I was asked, they came down to my office and said, hey, you've done TV before. Do you mind sitting in for Darren this weekend? Because we can't get anybody else in. It'd just be a one-time thing. Don't worry, you know, no big deal. So I prepared, but I didn't like take it like it was an audition, right? Like I just had fun with it. And I didn't know this story till about 10 years later, but on Monday, there was somebody from Fox was here in London and he was like in his hotel room, like you do, clicking through the things. And he caught our broadcast, right? And so they're in this post-production meeting and they're all sitting around the table and everybody's scared to death because he's like one of the big guys from out of town, right? So you know how those meetings go, right? Everybody's now sitting on pins and needles. Well, I'm not in that meeting, but I hear this, I get this story 10 years later. He looks at the guy who was doing the NFL at that time and he points at him and he goes, who was that blonde guy you guys had this weekend? I don't know who that is. And the guy goes, hey, don't worry. It was just a one-time thing. We'll never have him again. You know, it's like, he's making all these excuses. And the guy goes, no, I kind of like him. Make sure he gets on again. And that's how it started. So I never went to school. I never studied. I never auditioned. So when guys, like I said, when guys tell me, you know, I want to do what you do, no, you don't, dude. Because but when I, you know, I had a really, really good interview with Kiffin, right? Now, you got to understand, for me, like I said, for me, this is like, I walk into that building and I'm thinking to myself, this is where Darryl LaMonica was and Jim Otto was and Freddie B and Willie Brown and Lester Hayes and Ben Davids. I mean, those were the Raiders to me, right? And those guys all would have been in that building at one time. And about halfway through the interview, the door opens up and Mr. Davis had this guy, Al Locasal, who was kind of like his Man Friday or whatever, I don't know. But he opened the door and Mr. Davis came in. Mr. Davis was on oxygen at that time. And I remember, you know, I don't get impressed by stars very much or people very much. Mr. Davis was about 4 inches shorter than me and all, you know, shriveled up at that time. And I remember standing there going, I mean, like, it was like, wow, that's Al Davis. And I can remember, like, his hand was kind of shriveled up, kind of. So as he reached to shake my hand, he was in a wheelchair and he reached to shake my hand. I was like, whoa. But so I finished the interview and Kiffin calls me into his office and he goes, you want to tell you that you did a great job. Let me ask you a question. Do you have an agent? And I said, what? He goes, do you have an agent? And I went, no. I said, why would I have an agent? He goes, well, because everybody in this business at this level has an agent, to negotiate your contract. I said, no. And he goes, so I go, you mean you negotiate a contract? And he looked at me like I was the dumbest person he ever saw. I said, he asked me, he goes, how much do you make? And I told him, I make $85,000. And he shook his head and he goes, you need an agent. And he said, well, if I give you this job, it's going to be considerable, much more than $85,000. And I was like, how much? But like I said, I never even thought about that stuff. As long as I had enough money to live, I was fine, because you live on what you got, right? If you got 20,000, you live on 20,000. You got 200,000, you live on 200,000. Because to me, it never was about it still is. It's not about the money. Like coming over here probably doesn't make sense, from a financial standpoint and all that, because of the travel, time you're away from your family, all of the, you got to provide for yourself while you're here and all that stuff. So I just about break even on the deal. But what I will tell you is the emotional payback and the payback that I get when I see how much, like what you guys are doing, right? How 3 dudes got together and said, shit, let's have a podcast. We can do it, right? Guys, 10 years ago, that would have never happened. I mean, that was so far out of the realm of, and to watch Effie Abada play or watch J-Train play and realize that all those years ago when you first walked out onto a field in England and the grass was 6 inches long and there wasn't any lines and kids didn't have equipment, and the game has come so far. And I cling to that by coming over here for these 2 months. It's like it rejuvenates my spirit. It really does. So I get way more out of it than the people get out of having me here.
That's awesome. We see you very active on sort of socials and stuff, which you don't often get from people sort of, your stature. I know it sounds a bit weird, but like Matt said, we're all sort of fanboying here when we've got someone like you on, and even to just get your reply, Matt put it straight in the group and we're all like, oh my God, what do we do next? And it's like a huge thing to see. And I like that, like you say, that must be where you sort of get your kicks from, the fact that you're always interactive with people, even up until sort of coming on here, you're tweeting people left, right, and center. I love that. I think it's amazing.
You know what? I learned that from my dad. And baseball, baseball's a different game. Like I said, man, baseball's got its own pace. It's got its own vibe. It's got its own thing, right? And it's a beautiful game. It's not my game, but I can appreciate it as a game. And there were a lot of things that I learned from my dad that he brought to me from baseball. And I'll tell you one of them, the biggest one that shaped my personality in my life, was when I was a sophomore in high school. I started to get notoriety and get successful as a football player. And, they start writing articles about you in the newspaper and all that kind of stuff happens. And I don't know if my dad saw me do something that that he didn't think was the way I should do it, or he was trying to make a preemptive strike or what. But he pulled me aside and he told me a story about baseball. And he said, in baseball, he said it really bothered him when, like, a little kid would ask for an autograph and the baseball player would just beat a kid, And so they have a saying in baseball that kind of guy never learns to say hello until it's time to say goodbye. And I thought, woo, that's amazing. Yeah. Because really, I'll tell you, fellas, and this is not some self-deprecation bullshit, no phony baloney stuff. The truth of the matter is I have been just unbelievably lucky. And there are hundreds and probably thousands of guys who can do what I do. And would love to have the opportunity to do what I do. And so if you don't wake up every day grateful for that, then, you know, that's not good.
Yeah.
You owe it to the game. Because really, and again, this is not I've thought my way through this. It's not a bullshit statement. Almost everything I have in my life, positive, I can attribute to football in some way, shape, or form. So when there's people out there that love the game like I love the game, then I have a responsibility to respect that.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's too bad, but all too often guys don't see it that way. They see it as like somehow. Here's another one. This is a great one. I love this one. I freaking love this baseball saying. Do you guys understand baseball at all? How it works?
I've watched the Yankees a few times in New York.
All right. So the other one my dad used to say all the time, he goes, that guy was born on third base and spent his whole life thinking he hit a triple. Right? And it speaks to that same thing about be grateful for what you have, you know, appreciate people around you, recognize that it's not, you know, like if I didn't do what I do for Sky and I was just some slapdick in the Adagio Hotel, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? So it's not me, it's the game. It's always the game.
Yeah.
And
one of the things I was going to ask, I think you've already answered it, was have you ever been starstruck speaking to somebody? I think when you mentioned Al Davis there, that's probably the time when you've been most starstruck, maybe.
Yeah, Al Davis was when, in terms of speaking to somebody, because he was so much like, again, my age guys, dudes my age, remember the American Football League and the National Football League. And ABC had one on Sunday and CBS had the other one. I think CBS had the other one on Sunday. And Al Davis was the owner and coach, and then eventually he did everything at the Raiders. And he was such a rebel, and they were so out there. And I didn't realize this until later on, that the Raiders uniforms and color scheme and everything, Davis copied from the United States Military Academy. And that uniform is one of the only uniforms that has never changed in the history of the National Football League. And let me just say this, I hope it never does, because it's so iconic. And he built that whole thing, right? And he was one of the ones who forced the NFL to take the AFL teams, right? And the merger, and they, you know, them winning the Super Bowl. And I mean, just, and so all of a sudden, here's slapdick me standing up at a blackboard talking about how to protect the punt to the guy who damn near invented the game.
But it must be great, like I said, you've come over here, the evolution of the UK game at this moment in time, how much it's grown over the years. How have you found that, like, coming to the London games, Tottenham Stadium?
I love it, man. I'm telling you, because normally during the course of our year, I can't get to a London game, right?
Yeah.
Because we're playing. But one year I was able to come. And I remember going to the game at Wembley, and I was really, because I didn't know what to expect, right? Because my recollection of games in London was White Hart Lane, and we come up on the bus, we roll up on the bus, and they let us out, and there was a pub across the street, right? and I'm all dressed in Ryan Fire coaching gear, and I got 2 free tickets to the game, so I take them over to the pub and say to the bartender, you know, here, you want these, or give them out? The game's going to be at 5 o'clock or whatever. And the guy looked at me. It was like, what? Football? What? And Neil and I laugh about this, but I swear to God, because he was like a journalist intern at that time. You could go to those games at White Hart Lane, and I swear to God, you could count everybody in the stands. I swear you could. That's how there was nobody there. And so I'm thinking to myself, I wonder how this is really going to be, right? Is this going to be legit? And then the closer we get to the stadium, it starts. Like every corner you see Jaguars jerseys and Bucks jerseys and Raider jerseys and Giant jerseys and Packer jerseys. And by the time we got to the stadium and we did this pregame thing in the parking lot, and it was like madhouse. I mean, it was insane. And I think the London games are the closest you're ever going to get to a Super Bowl game. There's no other game. And I've coached in the Sugar Bowl, and I've coached in national championship games and Grey Cups, and it is the single best football environment next to the Super Bowl I've ever experienced.
Wow.
I mean, we want it, but I doubt it's ever going to happen. But would you welcome a London team? Did you ever see it happen in one day?
I think, you know what, I really thought until COVID hit, I thought we were within 3 years. I really, really did. When we came out of 2019 or 2018 probably, because 2019 COVID had reared its ugly head a little bit. But when we came out of 2018, with the success that we've had over here, with the amount of growth that has happened, not just ticket demand, but demand for product, demand for information, demand for programming, demand. I said, I know one thing about the NFL. They make money, right? And if there's a money stream, they're gonna find a way to mine it to its end. And the reality of it is, there are some franchises in the United States, Jacksonville being one, that probably would be better being here, right?
I mean, they have a whole weekly show as well on Sky, don't they? Jags UK Weekly. So hopefully, you never know. It makes sense. Yeah.
I think it's going to be, and people have asked me this before, and I think it's probably going to be a team move here rather than a expansion. Now, I'm sad to say this, but my gut tells me that because of COVID, it's probably got pushed back further on the agenda.
Yeah.
Do you ever think there'll be a Super Bowl over here?
Ooh, now that one's probably tougher because it comes down to economics and how are you going to justify to the chambers of commerce and states, and I mean, because think about it, man, when a Super Bowl comes to your community, right? Let's say the one that we had in Minnesota. Well, that's a huge, huge shot in the arm to the economy in Minneapolis, but also the state of Minnesota. So to take a Super Bowl off U.S. soil would be a real political landmine. I mean, there would have to be some serious give and get to get that done. And, the NFL has been protected from the antitrust laws in the United States for a long time. And part of that was kind of some backroom politics that went on between congressmen and the National Football League. Do not underestimate the power of the league.
So, as we briefly touched on the Super Bowl, who's your pick at this moment in time after this week? Who is going to win the Super Bowl? Who's your pick?
Well, here's kind of when I look at it, I say, okay, put your coach's hat on and recognize that the game today is different than it's ever been, and it's more quarterback dependent than it's ever been. So who are your elite quarterbacks? And you can really take that, you can whittle that down to about 8. And so those would be the first 8 if you start throwing people out, right?
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, now offensively, who has the ability to outscore people? Well, now you can start to weed out some more. And then defensively, it's not so much statistics in terms of defense other than scoring defense and turnovers. Who has a defense that is opportunistic to get turnovers? And then special teams, who, number one's not going to screw it up by missing field goals or getting punts blocked or stuff like that, but who has the dynamic difference, right? So when you look at all those facets, Kansas City's the team that you just keep coming back to. Because see, here's the thing. This is how frankly, bad we are in the media, right? And that's not being critical. It's making an observation, okay? What was the biggest play of that game against the Dolphins?
The Kansas City game.
Yeah.
I'd go for the 30-yard sack.
Yeah, same.
That punt return for a touchdown, because that's set. Think about that. If they don't get that punt return, now they may have scored on that drive, but we'll never know. But anytime your special teams can score for you, statistics say, and I'm not an analytics guy, but statistics say your chance of winning is now above 85%, right?
Yeah.
Kansas City, because of how they're structured, has the most dynamic, especially, shit, they got McCole Hardman back there, and the only guy faster than him is Tyreek Hill. And so when you got those kind of playmakers, at the end of the game, especially when Miami started to get hurt, when they lost Parker and those guys, what they did at the end of that game was amazing, because they got guys. Shit, the one kid played quarterback in the wishbone at Navy last year, and he's out playing wide receiver, right? They're trying to get then Gesicki gets hurt, and it's like their JV team out there, and they're scoring touchdowns. Now, the coach in me says, and I said this to Neil yesterday during the broadcast, and I think it actually got on the broadcast, I do not understand at the end of the third quarter why they're not in empty and they're not in no huddle, and because Kansas City had started to gang up on him, right? They started blitzing Tua, and he didn't know what to do with it because he didn't know where it was coming from. He's too young yet, right?
Yeah.
But that's what I thought they'd put him in empty so you could see everything where everybody was, and there was you can't disguise, because Tony made a great comment yesterday where the one play where Sorensen was down low and they had Matthew up high, and then right as Tua turned his head, Sorensen ran deep. So he thought he had single high, and then he turned around and it was too high, and he got sacked because he couldn't he's too young yet. He hasn't figured it'll come, but it's time. Well, I thought that they didn't do a very good job of protecting him that way. You know what I'm saying? To put him in looks where it's easier for him. But, that makes me say Kansas City's not unbeatable, but somebody's going to have to play a really, really good football game to beat them.
Yeah.
I'm sure Matt will be very happy. There's only one team that's beat him this year. He was itching to say it. So
yeah, and you know what? That's a really, really good point. Let's go back and talk about that, because see, even like I was even early on in the season kind of mistaken about this. I said, okay, I kind of fell onto the traditional thought of, if you're going to beat Kansas City, you got to keep Mahomes off the field. You got to run the ball. You got to control the clock. Yeah. That's all true, right? But when you get your chances, you better get your big plays on offense. You got to create chunk plays on offense. And if you look at that Raider game, twice, once they got Sorensen and once they got Matthew in coverage, and they beat them both for big touchdown passes. That's how you're going to have to beat them. And you have to play. You can't turn it over. You got to play solid special teams. There's a lot of things you got to do. I mean, shit, last night, Miami turned it over 4 times, right? And they sacked him 3 times, and he still beat them. So, but they're not unbeatable. They're not an invincible team.
As a rate, I'm going to selfish sort of Raiders mode here, but what is your stance on Derek Carr? I know he massively divides the fans, and I'm a huge fan of Derek Carr.
I really feel sorry for that kid. I really do. And it's funny because when David was playing quarterback for the Texans, the Carrs are from the Central Valley in California. And then David went to Fresno first, and then got drafted in the first round and went to Houston and was going to be the face of the franchise and all that stuff. So the entire Carr family moved to Houston. And it just so happened that Derek was a high school player in my recruiting area. So I got to watch him play. I got to, talk to him and stuff as a young kid. He's always been the same kid. He's always been really good person, really grounded, no bullshit about him, no, you know, he's a great teammate, all that stuff. I thought before he broke his leg that he was on a trajectory to be a Brett Favre, John Elway kind of quarterback. You know, maybe I think he makes better decisions overall than Favre probably did in that time in his career. Because Favre, you know, nobody's thrown more interceptions than him in the history of football. But I think that leg injury set him back. I think some of the stuff that went on in the organization set him back, where they're, you know, rolling coaches through there all the time. And I will say this, you know, John Gruden and I went to high school together, and I've known Johnny since he was 15. He can be tough. I mean, he can be tough to play for, especially as a quarterback, because he has very, very high standards, right? And John has never been one to hide his emotions or hide how he feels about something. And his personality in some ways is diametrically opposite of David's or Derek's. John's a swear guy. You know, John's a football coach's kid. His dad was a running back coach at Notre Dame when I was in high school. So he's a F this, F that guy. And I don't say that negatively, because I got the same issue. But Carr's not that way. He's a Christian kid, and you know, and so I think there was a time early in their relationship where it was really kind of rocky, because they didn't know, you know, they're kind of bumping into each other personality wise. What concerns me is when I watched him last night, there's so many good things that he does. And then every once in a while you get one and you just go, where did that come from? You know, because he can make throws now. I'm telling you, if you just rate him on his arm talent, I'm going to say he's in the top, you know, 10 in the league, certainly. Right now, and he's a better than average athlete, even though he's been hurt a bunch. He's a great competitor. Eric Harris, who plays for the Raiders, is a very close friend of mine, and Eric loves him. He says he's a great leader, all that stuff. But every once in a while, it's just like something creeps into his game, and he goes through a stretch where it looks like he can't see, you know. But I think certainly he's good enough. He's certainly, in my opinion, in the upper quarter of the quarterbacks in the league.
Yeah, I was saying to a couple of friends last night that I also feel a bit sorry for Derek Carr, because he has these times when he plays really, really well, and yet we go let a touchdown off 3 plays or something stupid. So, you know, what more has he got to do to get the stack of the W's, if you will?
Well, you know, this is really an interesting time at the Raiders, because I heard Bucky Brooks say, and I really, really respect Bucky. I think he's one of the better media guys out there in terms of understanding football, right? And he made a comment that Gunther's time was the clock was ticking on him anyway, because when they went and got Marinelli last year, that Gunther should have been looking over his shoulder, and that's unfortunate. But you know, because Gunther and John are good friends, you know, and that's a really tough. I'm sure it was really tough for him last night to have to let him go, but they're just not good enough. Like, did you watch the game last night?
Yeah.
Did you see the one time he dials up a zone blitz and on Taylor's long run, right? And there's nothing wrong with the call, because it's one of those blitzes that's good if they run, or good if you throw it, right? And I have no idea. I still cannot tell you what in the frick the middle linebacker was doing. And then their 2 defensive tackles aren't good enough. They're not good enough. And the guys that they got outside, Crosby is a great effort player, and he makes plays just because he's such a great effort player. Furl's never become the guy that they thought he was going to become. And so, you know, you got Morrow playing inside linebacker, and he beat out a guy that you drafted to be the starter, you know. So they're not good enough on defense right now. And I don't care who's coaching them. They're not good enough. And, you give up 200 yards rushing to the Jets and then come back and give up 200 and whatever it was last night. You can't do that in the National Football League and win football games.
I was going to ask as well, we've done the Super Bowl. Who's your pick at this moment in time for the Offensive Rookie of the Year? Obviously, it's always going to go to a quarterback, but I'm quite backing Justin Jefferson at the moment, but it's going to be the quarterback usually, isn't it? So
my call early in the year was Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and he started out on fire. But then they went and got Le'Veon Bell, and all of a sudden his touches went way down, right?
Yeah.
So he's not going to win it. Like Herbert helped himself again last night, but he's had a couple games where he kind of fell away. Tua's not, I don't think, going to have the gaudy numbers that people will want to have. Burrow was probably the favorite in my mind until he got hurt. So you start going through it, and, KJ Hamler's played well. Claypool's played well. Ruggs has played well. Judy's played well. But really, Jefferson's probably played as good as anybody, all in all. And that's interesting because, me included, he was not rated in the top 4 of the receivers coming in this class. As a matter of fact, it's interesting with him. His brother, Jordan, played quarterback for us in Montreal in 2012. He was a quarterback at LSU. They're from a little town called Destrehan, just south of New Orleans. And he came to a game, and I just remember him as this like 12 or 13-year-old, tall, skinny little kid. And it's hard for me now when I put on the NFL games to see, oh my God, that's Jordan's little brother.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Can I ask you from a coach's perspective, and again, obviously from the Giants, what you think of Jason Garrett as offensive coordinator for us? So we've gone from having a sort of 19th rated offense last year to, don't get me wrong, we've got no Barkley, but Goldman's done well enough to now being 31st rated. The same wide receiving corps are not getting any separation, any yak, and a lot of people are now putting it down to a Daniel Jones regression that I'm not seeing. What's your thoughts on the fit there? Because Judge is doing good things. Every other coach seems to be going well, obviously apart from the Colombo, but we've made the move. Is he in a hot seat? What's your thoughts?
I think first of all, everybody that's coaching is on the hot seat because it is the ultimate high performance industry. It's the ultimate what have you done this week industry. Yeah. And, I know Jason very well. Have competed against him since he was in college. When he was an assistant coach in Dallas, and I was living in Dallas, we lived very close to one another. He'd bring his dog over to the office. He really, really a good person. I think that he's a very, very intelligent guy. If you know Jason at all, he comes from a great football family. His dad was a lifetime coach. His brothers John and Judd, either played or coached in the NFL. He got a great football pedigree. I think right now what's happening in New York is they're going through the natural process of everybody figuring out how they all fit in and what they really are.
Yeah.
Thomas McGay, he's on that staff, and he described Joe Judge to me as a star. Those are his direct words. He's a star. But Joe is also, he's got a way he wants it done, and it's going to get done that way. And I think that was what happened with him and Mark. And I would be hopeful that they don't make a move at the end of the year. I really don't, because I think when you look at the reality of it is that their offensive line has, you go back, Hernandez, I think is his name, the kid from UTEP that they drafted real high a couple years ago. He's a real good run blocker. He's still learning how to be a guard and pass block. They missed on Eric Flowers. There've been a lot of, they go out and get Solder. He opts out, right? So it's been and then you lose not just your top running back, you lose a franchise guy, right?
Yeah.
And you got a young quarterback who's still finding his way, and, receivers that are good but not great. And I think that's a recipe for what has gone on there. And, I'm encouraged by the Giants. I really am. As a matter of fact, I do this little thing called Pickswise NFL, and for a company called Pickswise, and the girl that co-hosts it with me, she constantly refers to the Giants as your Giants. And I've never been a Giants fan, but I do, as a football coach, I watched that team, and he was in a real precarious spot about week 2 or 3 when they weren't winning, and he had just brought them through that real hard training camp, and coaches were running laps, and it was and it could have gone either way on him, and he persevered, and they're coming out the other end now, and they've developed a hardness, a toughness that the New York Giants have not had in a long, and I'm talking, this is how long, I think, to Parcells, because I don't think the Giants under Coughlin were a particularly tough team. They were talented, and they got hot at the right time, but Parcells' Giants were physically a tough team. This Giant team is starting to get that part of their DNA. And, as long as Gettleman and Judge are on the same page about who they want to bring in, then I think they'll continue to build on that, and they'll be a better and better team going forward.
Good.
Well, you've done the other 2 teams, so what about the Bucks? Are we going to the Super Bowl? Is Brady and Arians having a little bit of a tough time as well, but it seems to be clicking in the right time and playoff bound, hopefully. So it's first time since 2007, so that's a nice feeling.
I think that's a really interesting one, because Bruce has said some things that I think are really true. One of the things he said was that you can't just go get a bunch of football players, even though they're really good ones, and throw them out on the field.
Yeah.
And it's not PE class, right? It's not recess in elementary school, right? We're used to paying. I don't know if you guys do this over here, but in elementary school, they get you out of the building for an hour so you go out and play and run around and tire yourself out, right? So we would always go out and play football, and you always wanted to pick the best team because the best team always won. Well, this ain't that no more, right? Because they've got talent. I mean, they're an incredibly talented football team, and sometimes they don't play that way because everybody's not on the same page yet. This has been the most wacky, crazy, disjointed, distraction-laden training camp, preseason, now into season, that the NFL's ever experienced. And so now you take all those guys down there, and the other thing is, every one of those guys has got an ego, right? And now you got to try and fit that ego into a 50-man roster, and everybody's got to know what the other guy's doing and how he's thinking. And Tom comes out of being in New England. What was he in New England? 18 years, 20? I don't know.
Yeah,
right.
20. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden he's going to come in and have to learn a new terminology, a new system, new reads, new people, new way to travel, new way to go to the game, new pregame routine. I mean, it's like when you start adding it up, it's freaking amazing how much has got to changes, right?
Yeah. Especially because yesterday as well, they'll talk about the temperature. It's usually in Foxborough, it's about -20, and now it's like 90 degree, like 90 Fahrenheit, isn't it? So summer in the winter time, isn't it, in Tampa? So it's completely different.
It's interesting you mention that, because I have really thought about it a lot, and I would not be surprised if that doesn't prolong his career another year or two.
Yeah.
Because being in that warmth where you're, all those let's face it, fellas, when it's cold, when it's 20 degrees outside, and and I'm talking about Fahrenheit, not Celsius, but when it's 3 degrees Celsius outside, and your shoulder hurts and your knee hurts and your neck's sore, and they're really. But when you're warm, your body tends to respond better. I love BA. Like, I wish there were more guys like him in the league. When I say that, I also recognize that he's going to say something sometimes that you might go, whoa, right?
Yeah.
And I think he and Tom are trying to figure out where they, how they work together, and that's a process. But if they get the right draw in the playoffs, I can see them running really deep, even to the Super Bowl. If they get the wrong draw, I can see them out the second game.
Yeah, we've actually said that before, haven't we? It depends who they get if they get to the playoffs, whether they get a good win or not. I'm in awe of you, Jeff. I really am. It's been a pleasure hearing your stories and a pleasure speaking to you. If people want to catch you on Twitter, where can they follow you?
Jeff_Reinebold on Twitter, and I don't even know what my Instagram thing is. I got one. But you know what, guys? I do a show. I'll do it tomorrow night, and we call it Coffee with the Coach. Now it's turning into Wine with the Coach because I do it at night. I used to do it in the morning. But what I want to see is an interactive community of NFL fans in the UK. And so I'm not, as you can tell, I'm not an intellectual, and I'm certainly not a technological intellectual, but we use the platform of Periscope because you can interact live on it, right?
Yeah.
So if you guys want to jump on with us tomorrow night and talk about your podcast and all that stuff, that'd be cool.
Yeah,
absolutely. He said it's is that Coachman, Jonathan Coachman? Did you say?
It's Coffee with Coach.
Coffee with Coach.
Yeah, and you just go to my Twitter account; it'll be up there. And then you just send in a question, and we'll get you on, and you guys can have at it.
Yeah,
brilliant.
That's perfect. Thank you.
It's as I said, it's been a pleasure, certainly from my point of view, and I'm sure the other two guys think the same.
Likewise.
We'll let you get to your busy Monday evening in London before they lock you down, I guess. No, it's been an absolute pleasure, Jeff, and thank you very much.
All right, guys, you're the best.
Thank you, man.
Keep doing your thing, man.
Thank
Brilliant.
you.
Thank you.
Take care, buddy.
Go Raiders.